Expedition 33 is a beautiful game. You know it, I know it, the Game Awards know it.
Expedition 33.
Expedition 33.
Expedition 33. Wuthering Waves as the winner.
But what I want to talk about today is the beauty of the art behind the game and how much it reveals about Sandfall's creative process. Through these pieces, we see glimpses of how the story evolved, including ideas that never made it into the final game. If you've ever paused to examine some of the paintings in the Manor, you're already familiar with a small portion of this concept art. But there's a lot more online, much of it on the ArtStation page of the game's art director, Nicolas Maxson-Francombe. I spent a ton of time going through it, and here's what I found. The art is mostly grouped by location, so we'll start in Lumiere. First up is a piece that's actually in the game. It's the very canvas that the game takes place in, visible in Renoir's atelier during Alicia's epilogue. But you might not recognize it because it's distorted by the fluid, moving chroma. It depicts the gommage of Lumiere at the docks, complete with some of the citizens fading away into nothingness. Next is another depiction of the docks, showing more scenery. In the left corner, we see Maëlle sitting next to an original design for Gustave, sporting a blonde undercut. We also see an earlier model of an expedition ship. The rear paddleboat design is familiar, but the rest of it trades the traditional wooden ship look for a sleek steampunk-inspired design, reflecting the game's early steampunk roots. Now here we have a bird's eye view of the city. In the back you can spot the opera house and the gardens we traverse on our way to fight Renoir in Act 3. But there are additions that we never see in-game, including this tiny little house on top of the Eiffel Tower, and this entire subsection of the city connected by a bridge. Our last stop in Lumiere is a series of posters visible at the start of the game along the fence while following Maëlle, but here they're all conveniently translated into English. This last one's a little different. It reads mirror here, but in-game it says opera. The rhetoric and symbolism around mirrors in the game makes this a notable change. Next up is Dark Shores, which excites my little nerd brain because one of these images supports a theory from my off-camera secrets video. First, we see the expedition arriving in their steampunk shoeboat, with painted Renoir waiting for them on the beach. But high above, shadowy figures perch atop these spires. We can assume these are Verso and painted Alicia, given Verso's intervention to save Maëlle during the chaos on the beach. Next, we see Blonde Gustave traversing an area we never reach in-game. The boat here cuts off access to a large, partially developed area of the zone. When I found this area, I wondered if Gustave was meant to reach Spring Meadows through this way, and it looks like Sandfall may have considered that at one point. Speaking of Spring Meadows, here we have non-blonde Gustave following a blood trail to a dead expeditioner. It looks like there's chroma rising from the body, potentially being absorbed by this indigo tree. Chroma being absorbed from dead expeditioners is a theme we'll see more of later in the video. Here we switch back to Blondstaff, looking out over the scenery, and we spot an earlier design for the Petanque. Above him, we see the lower half of a sprong standing atop a mountain. In this next one, there's not much that's revelatory at first glance until you notice Maëlle's pictured here next to Gustave, but we don't actually encounter Maëlle until we get to the Manor via flying waters, right? Well, it looks like that wasn't originally the plan. Here's another image showing Gustave finding Maëlle at a makeshift camp within the upside-down house that we come across. We also see Gustave and Maëlle facing the Avec, the first real boss fight of the game. Notice Gustave's weapon though. It's not the pistol we see in-game, but looks more like a gunblade, the kind of weapon used by Squall in Final Fantasy VIII. There's actually a cut enemy chroma version of Verso that uses the same weapon, more on that later. The last Spring Meadows image shows Lune with a magically conjured bird. There's quite a few shots of Lune with conjured animals, suggesting that she was originally conceived as more of a druidic magic user, such as this early concept design of her with a dragon and a tiger. Moving to the world map section, things start to get really interesting. In this concept, we see Lumiere up at the top, then coming down to the continent we have Dark Shores. This makes the ship's passage to the continent a little more plausible than in-game, where access is only via a cave leading to a waterfall. But take a look at this massive area of angry-looking lava, volcanic rock, and red lightning and smoke. This place looks awesome. It looks like a companion zone, the Frozen Hearts, which would explain the ice and fire themed Nevrons found there. As much as I absolutely loved Verso's drafts from the latest update, I was hoping this was going to be the new playable area, but maybe someday. Monolith sits at the center here, flanked by 4 Axon islands. These are obviously Visage and Seren. This one over here is for Holler, with its Colosseum-looking structure, and this one is the Reacher. How do I know? Well, let's flip this around so you get a sense of where these islands are. Hold on to that image and then look at this image of the world map. Again, we see the Monolith at the center. Here's Seren, Haller perched atop their Colosseum, Visage, and lastly the Reacher. We also get a better look at the rest of the zones per the same layout. It's a really stark contrast to the sprawling map we got in-game. Now I'll move quickly through Flying Waters since it doesn't differ much from the game, but here's a shot of the party standing off against Goblu. This one's actually in the end credits of the game. You can see Ciel here bears a different weapon, a bow and arrow, and Lune is throwing magical jellyfish. And then here's a design for Surf and Fair before its lighthouse head was added. Its head is similar to Crueler with some added googly eyes. Some of the Manor images are really striking. This main entrance hall looks more sinister with these horned statues, which I knew I'd seen somewhere before, and here it is, off in the distance of Spring Meadows. I don't think we actually see this one anywhere else in the game. Here we have our heroes hanging out in a large room that doesn't exist. Miles over here enjoying her favorite pastime, and we have Lune with what might be her conjured lion, but remember the lion we see when fighting Painted Renoir at the Monolith? Well, on the ArtStation of lead character artist Alan Reynaud, there's a model of a lion here that we never see in-game. And the file name are the words Monolith and Bernest, presumably the lion's name. So this might have been an early model for Renoir's lion. Perhaps it once had a larger role to play in the story. And then we have these two unknown people in the background. Maybe meant to be the fading man and woman? I honestly have no idea. Any thoughts? Let me know in the comments. Renoir's atelier has a final boss arena kind of look to it. What's awesome about this image is that you can make out a lot of the canvases hanging from the ceiling. Renoir's working on the Reacher over here, and then over on the right we've got Yellow Harvest, Crimson Forest, Dark Shores, Seren, on and on and on. Just an amazing amount of fine detail in this one. Now on to the Ancient Sanctuary. Early designs for these Gestrals are a little creepier looking, closer to humans than the models we got in-game. The designs for the Sakapatats are kind of wild. It looks like the Gestrals wear them like hats instead of piloting them from the inside. How'd that work again? Anyway, here's Shrek's cabin. Next up is a Gestral village. Remember getting to the casino area and being kind of disappointed that it was empty? You've even got a bunch of signs warning you not to go there and that it smells bad. But then you get there and there's no minigames, no gambling, no NPCs really outside of the one hiding in the casino. Well, look at this. See, now this is what I'm talking about. You get Gestrals in fancy suits, serving up martinis, one of which has a martini glass for an actual face. This casino looks like it's open for business, and the whole place feels alive. I really wish we got this in-game, and I might be biased, having fond memories of the Gold Saucer in Final Fantasy VII. God, that place was fun. Oh well. The Gestral Doctor looks a little more capable here. Rather than sleeping, he's owling on his perch with a medicine bowl and a giant stim pack. Lastly, we've got the Jousting Arena, which shows some boats with fire? I don't totally get it, but it sure looks badass. Now, there wasn't really much for Esquia's nest, but there is this absolutely heartbreaking depiction of Esquia rescuing an unconscious Ciel after she nearly drowned herself out of grief for her lost husband. Now let's take a look at the camps. That's right, camps, plural. We get only the single camp location in-game, but there are designs here for camps within each of the major zones, indicating that Sandfall may have played around with the idea of various camp environments like we get in Baldur's Gate 3. Next is Stonewave Cliffs. Here we see Ciel and Verso face off against an early Hexcode design. Instead of its giant club, it has this wicked-looking spear for an arm and has an actual face unlike the one in-game. Then here's our first look at Painted Renoir, who looks quite a bit different. He's got two canes instead of the one, he's channeling lightning from a storm raging in the background, and he's looking quite dapper with a little bow tie and a mustache. Zooming out though, we see something really interesting. And that's Verso standing alongside Gustav facing down Renoir. This could mean that Sandfall once considered Verso intervening before Renoir kills Gustav. There's some evidence a little while later in the video at the Monolith that points to this as well. But first, let's take a look at the Forgotten Battlefield, and there's a lot to unpack here. It looks like the main gate was meant to be impassable, forcing you to go up the side of this cliff over here. Floating in the air above you are some expeditioner bodies with what looks like their blood or chroma being drawn out. Just more evidence that there might have been plans beyond chroma simply being trapped within their bodies. This could also explain the weird, goopy body sculptures in the cave in Spring Meadows. Next is an action shot that's totally chaotic. It shows Verso and Lune running to get away from some unknown attackers, with Lune throwing up a barrier just in time to protect herself from an explosion. and in the distance we see Mael outpacing them. In the next shot, we see Mael down in a canyon, apparently hiding from the duelist who's stalking the area. Here's a wide shot looking over the area with these blue sort of ethereal entities roaming around, perhaps meant to be sentries or even souls of those fallen on the battlefield. There are also these curious structures in the distance. This shot suggests that it may have been planned for us to traverse our way up there, possibly via grappling points along these bits of floating rock here. And I say that because this next shot appears to be within one of those structures. This appears to show the Chalier in front of a pile of bodies, who we do see in-game in a different location at the floating cemetery. Lastly, we've got this absolutely amazing panorama of the battlefield during a previous expedition. The style is akin to a Renaissance-era painting, and the level of detail here is mind-boggling.
Did you say mind-boggling?
Yeah, mind-boggling. Things are so crazy it gets your thoughts all trapped like in a bottle.
Now, I'm not an artist. I can barely draw a stick figure, so I can't even imagine the time and effort that went into creating this. There's an all-out war happening here, and everyone's a part of it. We have trebuchets firing from the background, the Grandis with their warhammers, several Gestrals piloting their Sacapatates, and of course a litany of expeditioners. Here's one hoisting an Expedition 46 flag, which is Lune's parents' expedition. Up here we have expeditioners heroically leaping onto a bourgeon amidst an explosion. Moving down, we can see a magic wielder healing his fallen comrade. And then panning over, we get a sense of how hopeless this battle really is for the expeditioners. The front lines here don't look too bad until you see the duelist back here, and an army of Neverons behind him. Curiously, the Monolith reads 47, either an inconsistency or it means that Expeditions 46 and 47 were traveling the continent together. Next stop is a place I've talked about before in my Cut Enemies video. This looks like an earlier plan for Sunless Cliffs, the place where you access a portal to fight a high-level mime. In the files, it's just referred to as the Chroma Zone, and it's where you were to fight mirror chroma versions of each member of the party. I fought a couple of these in that video thanks to a mod, and they were almost finished, though Minoko is pretty broken. In Frozen Hearts, we see a room that we never encounter with this strange-looking machinery. It looks like when this lever's pulled, the heated press would push together over this sort of ice chroma mixture to form something. The mold looks vaguely humanoid shaped, so it could have been a way to produce those fire and ice Neverons roaming the zone like the Danseuse, Pèlerin, or Brasoleur. It could also be the Great Forge that the Grandis Merchant in Minoko Station references. Now, we're going to cover all the Axons, and I think Visage is the most interesting of the bunch, so let's knock the others out quick. Here's the Hauler in Old Lumiere looking very much alive and not killed by Simon yet. Then we have the Reacher in its original form that we don't really see in-game unless you have a free cam during the cutscene with Alicia, which you should be able to do with photo mode now. There's also some art for enemies we never see. We've got this bird-like Neveron, a helicopter complete with cannon, and 2 Orphelins hanging on for dear life, and this guy with a fire bucket on his head. This image of Seren shows she originally had this floating orb above her head, which resembles a pomander, an antique fashion accessory that would be stuffed with fragrances in an attempt to ward off bad air and disease. There's also this image of the glissando popping off its face and a bunch of the ballet Neverons tumbling out of it. Adorable. Now our last Axon is Visage, and a key difference here are some structures that we don't see on that island. Here we have an upside-down ruined house, which reminds me of that small level outside of Old Lumiere with the door puzzle. Then there's this image of a building on fire with Mael running through it. One theory is this was meant to represent the fire at the Manor, and this would have been another one of Mael's nightmare interludes. This is the one that really interested me though. Here we have Verso approaching Painted Renoir, who we never see in this zone. And he's waiting for Verso among stacks of these very large bookcases with books floating through the air above him and more littering the path between him and Verso. I think this suggests a tie-in with the writers, but it's really difficult to say what that could have been with what little we know about them. Could Renoir have ties to the writers that we're never told about? We can only really speculate, which is what you should do in the comments, because I really love reading that stuff. Before we leave Visage, I want to show you these sketches of some enemies that never were. Interestingly, they both seem execution-themed. This guy wields a large executioner's axe, and this one literally has a guillotine for a head. I guess that's a French joke. Now let's take a look at the Monolith. There are a few enemy designs here that I was surprised to find in the Monolith section. They're some of Renoir's creations. Until I remembered that Renoir's drafts is technically supposed to be below the Monolith, a fact that's referenced multiple times through the game. We even see Simon here with a big chunk of his skull missing, and this kinda yellow goop floating around in it. This made me pause and think a minute about Renoir's drafts. In that zone, we see all this yellow lightning looking stuff up in the air. Out of bounds, you can find these two statues with their heads bowed and that same yellow lightning seemingly zapping them. And then there's Simon's journal, where he mentions he's losing control of his mind to Renoir, so it seems like there was a more fleshed out mind control element to Renoir that was cut out of the story. Even more surprising though is that Verso is nowhere to be found in these images and is replaced with Gustav, who dies long before we get to the Monolith. And I say it's Gustav because not only does he look markedly different from Verso and the rest of this art, he's also the only one to carry the Lumina converter, both throughout the concept art and in the game. It makes you wonder about the original intent. Was Gustav not supposed to die at Stonewave Cliffs? Was he revived somehow before you get to the Monolith? Unfortunately, we may never know. And at the end of the day, this is mostly concept art. It doesn't necessarily have to perfectly line up with Sandfall's intent at one point or the other. It's just fun to theorize and enjoy some amazing art while you do it. If you like my videos and want to support the channel, you can join through YouTube memberships or visit my Ko-fi link in the description. Any little bit helps me keep creating. It's never expected but always greatly appreciated. If you want to support non-monetarily, a sub and a like or comment helps a lot to make the videos visible to others. And if you want more of my Expedition 33 ramblings, you can find a playlist right here. I want to thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.